You found your way to Blood Moon Radio. I'm Coralie, and this is where we follow the threads the world wants us to drop. Today's episode is part 2 of our Canadian Witchcraft mini-series. There's a story we're often told about witchcraft, that it disappears after the trials. That once the accusations stop, the magic stops too. But that's never how it works. Magic doesn't vanish when it's pushed underground. It adapts. It weaves itself into kitchens and gardens, into prayers and folk remedies, into private rituals carried quietly across oceans and generations. In Canada, witchcraft didn't end after New France. It changed shape. Today, we're going to look at what came after the trials, how magical practice survived and evolved here, how different traditions braided together into something distinctly Canadian, how modern systems like Odyssian Wicca emerged, and why the law continued to police magic long after people stopped burning witches. This episode is about what grows when belief is forced to hide. Canada is not a place of singular magical lineage. It is a place of arrival. People came here from Britain, France, Ireland, Scotland, Germany, Eastern Europe, and later from the Caribbean, Africa, South Asia, East Asia, and beyond. They didn't leave their beliefs behind. They carried them folded into memory, habit, and ritual. What formed wasn't a single tradition, but syncretic practice. That means magic built from overlap. Christian prayer spoken like spellwork, herbal knowledge learned from mothers and grandmothers, folk charms mixed with scripture, seasonal observances adapted to new climates, old gods remembered under new names. Much of this magic would never have been called witchcraft by the people practicing it. It lived in healing hands, food preparation, birth and death rituals, protection charms, weather watching, blessings said quietly over children. This kind of magic survives because it's useful and because it's relational, tied to land, body, and survival. It's also important to say this clearly. European settler magic developed alongside, and often in ignorance of, or direct conflict with, Indigenous spiritual systems that already existed here. Indigenous spiritual practices are not Canadian witchcraft in the same way, and they are not ours to claim or blend without consent. What's true is that settlers learned plant knowledge, land awareness, and seasonal adaptation from Indigenous peoples, often without acknowledgement. Canadian magical practice was shaped by migration, borrowing, loss, and silence. After the witch trials, overt magical identity became dangerous, so witchcraft went domestic. Magic moved into kitchens, bedrooms, gardens, laundry rooms, churches. Women, especially, became the quiet carriers of this knowledge. Not because women are inherently more magical, but because domestic labor was one of the few socially acceptable spaces for embodied knowledge. Cooking becomes alchemy, cleaning becomes purification, gardening becomes spellwork, prayer becomes invocation. This is where Canadian witchcraft becomes invisible but persistent. And this invisibility wasn't accidental, it was enforced. Here's where things get particularly interesting. Even after witch trials faded, the law never stopped regulating magic. In Canada, for much of its history, it was illegal to pretend to practice witchcraft, sorcery, or fortune-telling for fraudulent purposes. That language matters. The crime wasn't belief, it was claiming power. This law lived in Section 365 of the Criminal Code, and it criminalized fortune-telling, witchcraft, and spiritual services under the guise of fraud. In practice, this law disproportionately targeted women, spiritual practitioners, immigrants, Romani people, Indigenous and Afro-Caribbean spiritual workers. It positioned intuition, magic, and spiritual labor as deception, while allowing male-dominated institutions like finance, law, and organized religion to claim authority without question. This wasn't about protecting people from scams. It was about controlling who gets to speak with authority. And as Monica shared on the podcast, this law is directly connected to the founding of Witchfest North, which emerged in response to the news that Bill C-51 was challenging obsolete laws, including Section 365. In 2018, Canada finally repealed the section of the Criminal Code that made it illegal to pretend to practice witchcraft or tell fortunes. Think about how recent that is. That means that for most of modern Canadian history, identifying publicly as a witch or offering spiritual services carried legal risk. Magic didn't disappear. It was just forced to whisper. By the mid to late 20th century, things began to change. Immigration broadened the country's spiritual tapestry. Religious freedom widened its legal arc. Feminism challenged old hierarchies, and occult texts became more available. Those shifts created room for modern witchcraft to stop existing only in the margins and begin to take clearer public forms. One distinctly Canadian contribution to the moment was Odyssian Wicca, founded in the 1970s. Odyssian practice is notable because it was built for urban, pluralistic life. It emphasizes training and priesthood, liturgy and ritual structure, and public practice in ways that support community leadership rather than secrecy. Where some strands of Wicca remained small and household-based, Odyssian groups imagined a visible, organized expression of pagan life that could coexist with jobs, families, and civic responsibilities. That same impulse to move from private practice into recognized spiritual life also gave rise to church model institutions. In Canada, the late 20th century saw the first attempts to create Wiccan churches, organized places for rites, education, and public worship. Early organizations, such as the Wiccan Church of Canada, helped translate ritual practice into structures that could serve larger communities. More recently, national and provincial efforts to incorporate Wiccan bodies, establish clergy accreditation, and secure charitable or legal recognition, as some groups have done, have marked important steps toward civic legitimacy. Why does this matter? Because legal and institutional recognition changes how a practice is treated in public life. It allows rites, weddings, and educational programs to exist openly. It gives practitioners recourse and presence in civic spaces, and it signals to the wider culture that earth-based spiritualities are not mere curiosities, but religions with communal, ceremonial, and civic weight. That institutional emergence was only one thread of the revival. Across the country, the same period also produced pagan federations, public rituals, occult bookshops, metaphysical stores, and festivals. Taken together, these developments meant that witchcraft, once forced inward by fear and law, could finally be named again in public, taught and practiced openly, and offered as a living tradition rather than a widespread secret. But visibility doesn't erase history. The witch is still a gendered figure, still associated with women, queerness, outsiders, and those who refuse easy categorization. When we look at the long arc, from witch trials to domestic magic, to criminalized spiritual labor, to modern revival, a pattern emerges. Witchcraft is suppressed when it threatens power. It resurfaces when people reclaim agency. In Canada today, witches are artists, herbalists, therapists, scholars, parents, activists, business owners. They are not hiding in the woods. They are navigating zoning bylaws, social media algorithms, and lingering stigma. And the question is no longer, is witchcraft legal? But rather, who is believed, who is mocked, who is protected, and who is punished? Canadian witchcraft is not ancient in the way some traditions are. It doesn't rely on unbroken lineage or singular myth. Instead, it is woven from migration, from adaptation, from silence and survival, from law and resistance. It is a practice shaped by weather, by displacement, by gendered labor, by regulation, and by quiet persistence. In our final mini episode of the series, we'll look at witchcraft in Canada today, who is practicing, how magic is expressed now, and what it means to reclaim the word witch in a country that once made pretending to be one a crime. Until then, stay curious, stay grounded, and remember, what survives suppression often carries the strongest magic. As always, thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to attend a live event with me, I'll be presenting a workshop, The Burned and the Burdened, Reclaiming Power from the Witch Wound, at Monica Badirski's online School of Esoteric Arts, Obsidian Academy, on February 3rd, 2026. You can find the sign-up link at www.monicabadirski.com underneath the shop heading. And until next time, remember, the truth echoes louder after dark, whispered, unfiltered, waiting to be touched. See you soon.